Hi folks, this video is part of the tutorial series for Mark Herman's Empire of the Sun, the excellent strategic level simulation of World War II in the Pacific. We'll use the revised rules included in the second edition, as well as the excellent new Vassal module by Francisco Colmenares. Each video focuses on one aspect of the game system, and we look at the rules both for an understanding of the key mechanics as well as how to use them intelligently in the game. There's no set sequence for the videos, although new players may want to start with supply and activation along with running a basic offensive before moving on to anything else. Hey folks, in this session we're going to focus on how to run a fairly simple offensive, and we're going to look at a few examples focusing on the basic mechanics and the sequence of play for running an offensive. So what we'll do is I'm going to choose some situations where the target and the card have already been decided by me because they'll be decent examples. And in another session we'll look at how to sort of analyze your hand, how to assess what your targets for a turn ought to be, and how to maybe pick the right card for a particular target. But for now, just to get started, we'll use some situations where I've already picked out the target and the card to run the offensive. To give you just a little bit of strategic background on where we are with this offensive, this is out of a real game that is going on right now. It's actually a fairly interesting game because the Japanese started with a quite weak offensive hand on the first couple of turns. So they were very slow out of the gate, but the flip side was they had several War in Europe cards that they played, and so as you can see right now, War in Europe is in the -7 territory, which is really pretty bad news for the Allies in the sense that they not only lose their amphibious reinforcement, which starts to happen down here in this area, but once you're down here in the red as the Allies, you also lose a card every turn. So the Japanese were slow out of the gate, but the Allies are going to be slow coming back because they're in -7 territory for War in Europe. So with that, what we're going to do is we're going to look at an offensive over here in the CBI, and let's just move in and blow things up a little bit here. And so the background in the CBI is that, again, because everything was a little bit slow, we're here in turn 4, and the Japanese are just getting cranked up, and they're going to run an offensive to try to capture Rangoon. Because I'm in Vassal as the Allied side rather than as a referee, you'll see up here I can see the Allied hand, but I can't see the Japanese hand. I can pull cards off of the Allied deck, but I can't pull cards off the Japanese deck. So I'm not actually able to pull up and show you the card that was used here, but I can tell you that the actual card used to conduct this offensive by the Japanese player was the General Adachi card. It's a military event. It was used as the event. It has a logistics value of 5. It can be used to activate the South or the South Seas HQ, but not combined fleet. And it has a constraint that only air and ground units can be activated, which of course is fine for Burma because very often we don't have any naval units that the Japanese want to activate in Burma. And it also has a really unusual benefit in that it's the only card I can think of where the offensive player's units don't have to be in supply. In fact, even the HQ doesn't have to be in supply to be able to run this offensive. But just for the purposes of checking supply, let's pretend that we do have to, and we'll take a quick look at that. The other thing is, normally it would have, because it's got a logistics value of 5, it would have 6 activations if using South here, because you get 5 for the logistics value plus 1, which is the efficiency rating. So normally you'd have 6 activations, but there's a special rule in the second edition that reduces South HQ's logistics value by 1 if the Japanese are activating any units in Burma or North India here, and if the Kwai Bridge has not been built and Rangoon has not yet been captured. So that just reflects that there's more constraints on Japanese logistics if the Japanese don't control Rangoon and have the Kwai transport route constructed. So that is the case here. The Kwai Bridge has not been built, and the Allies are still holding Rangoon. So the Japanese will have to subtract 1. So they'll have a total activation value of 5 units for this card. Just checking supply here really quickly. If we zoom out on the magnification, it makes it a little bit easier to see that it in fact is exactly 12 hexes around the Horn of Singapore here and up to this coastal hex. So the Japanese can trace a sea supply route there, and although the Allies have got an air ZOI over there that potentially could block that sea route, the Japanese have their own ZOI there that neutralizes it. So if we did have to trace supply, if this weren't a special card that allowed us to get away without it, we could still trace supply to those guys up there. We would not be able to trace supply over land. Let's just zoom in here. The reason being that with this route not built, it's 2 movement points for each of these hexes. And if you've seen the session on supply and activation, or if you've read the 2nd edition rules, you'll know that there's a special overland logistics range that comes in here. And basically we'd have to trace 4 movement points, and it's actually a half, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you couldn't trace overland here. But again, we've got a perfectly good sea trace, and we actually don't need it because of the special value of the card. So that leads us really into the first piece of the offensive sequence of play. And probably the best advice I can give you is when in doubt, follow the sequence of play closely, because there's lots and lots of questions that will be answered if you just take a close look at the sequence of play. And in fact, so I'm looking at 7.2 here, which is on page 13 of the rules, if you happen to have those handy. But if not, it doesn't matter. So step 1 is the offensive player activates supplied units within activation range of an eligible HQ. So we are going to run this offensive with South HQ here. And we are certainly going to want to activate these units up here, because that is the main ground offensive that we're trying to conduct. So we've got 3 ground armies here that are at full strength that are going to go against Rangoon. And then we're also going to activate the 2nd Air Division and the 5th Air Division over here. And all of those are easily within supply range. These guys up here were the most in doubt. But these guys over here are also in supply as well. And so that's the first thing you got to do is select all of your units and activate all of your units. And you need to activate them all before you move anybody, because one of the things you can't do is you can't activate a unit and then move it in such a way that it puts another unit in supply or in activation range that otherwise wouldn't have been. And a typical case for that would be if you were to move an air unit with a ZOI, you might move an air unit to a place where it now neutralizes an enemy ZOI that wasn't neutralized before, suddenly putting somebody in supply, and that's a no-no. When you're running an offensive, you got to activate everybody first, so you're testing supply at the very beginning before you actually move anybody. So what we've done is we've activated everybody here, and now we're going to move folks. And so what we do is we'll move all those guys into Rangoon there, and then basically we're going to fly cover over Rangoon, and we're going to fly it from Bangkok. This guy is already in Bangkok, so he doesn't have to move. This guy has to get there. And the other thing we didn't talk about is General Adachi, even though we're using him as an event card, a military event, so we use the logistics value to determine how many units we can activate, we still have to take note of the operations value of the card, whether it's 1, 2, or 3, because that's going to determine the number of movement legs for the air units as well as the movement points that ground units have. So because it's a 3 OC value card, that means the ground units can move 3 movement points. That's no problem here, because although we didn't count before, I happen to know that it's only 2 to get from here to here, because jungle and mixed terrain is 2, so the ground units were fine. And then with a 3 OC card, air and naval can each move 3 legs. This air has an extended range of 4, so it can move 3 legs of 4, so its first leg might be 1, 2, 3, 4 like that, and 1, 2, 3, 4 like that. And it could just as easily fly from either Phnom Penh or Bangkok. It's not going to make any difference, because you'll notice the normal range is 2, the extended range is 4. If we're flying anything beyond a range of 2 hexes, we're going to be halved in combat. There's no airbase that the Japanese control that's within 2 hexes of Rangoon right now. So this is one of the things that makes taking Rangoon initially a little bit more of a challenge, because the Japanese air cover is not quite as strong. And so flying this guy out of either Bangkok or Phnom Penh doesn't matter, because this is a 4-hex range, this is a 3-hex range, and either way it's going to be halved. So let's put it there, and so we've moved those guys there at that point. And then by virtue of moving into the hex, we've effectively declared Rangoon as a battle hex. If there were any other battle hexes, we would declare them now. For example, one of these guys could, if it wanted to, strike 1, 2, 3, 4, either of these two guys to try and prevent it from, basically pin it and prevent it from moving. So if we were going to declare one of those as a battle hex, we would have to do that now. But we're not. We're just going to run a simple offensive where we've got these two guys flying cover over Rangoon. The other thing to keep in mind is that if we were using a card as an OC card, in other words, not as the military event, either because we didn't want to use the military event or because it wasn't actually a military event card, then we would only be able to declare one battle hex. With the military event card, you can declare as many battle hexes as you want. And this is, in fact, a military event card, so we could declare more battle hexes if we wanted to, but we're not going to in this particular situation. Then, at this point, if this were an Allied offensive against the Japanese, it would be time for the Japanese to declare weather if they had a weather card that they wanted to play, because this is where the Japanese actually have 3 weather cards in the deck that they can use to just completely cancel an Allied offensive. But we are the Japanese going against the Allies. The Allies, fortunately, don't have any weather cards, so we don't have to worry about that here. The other thing that happens at this point is if there were an opportunity for a special reaction, we would address that here. Special reaction is a particular case that doesn't apply here, but it occurs if the offensive player is taking basically an enemy base or named location, typically a resource hex, let's say, that is not defended but is under a ZOI, then the reaction player has an opportunity to roll to determine whether he can declare that a battle hex and actually react to it, even though he doesn't have any of his own forces in it. So that comes up, and we'll look at that later. We're not going to talk about that right now, but we'll look at a case of special reaction in a future session when we look at more complex offensives. So right now, no special reactions. This is the only battle hex that's going on. And so it's now time for the reaction player to determine what the intelligence condition is going to be. And normally, the intelligence condition will always start as surprise, and it will be up to the reaction player to try and do something about that. If the card does not say surprise, if the offensive card does not say surprise, then the reaction player has the opportunity either to roll the dice or to play a reaction card to change the intelligence condition from surprise to intercept. If the offensive player's military event card actually says specifically that the intelligence condition is surprise, then the reaction player can only change the intelligence condition with a card play that allows it. He can't do it with a die roll. So in this case, the General Adachi card is not a surprise card. It's just a normal military offensive. That means the Allies can attempt to change the intelligence condition with a die roll. And because it's a 3OC being played as an event, the die roll on the card, and let me just pull up an example of a hand. Let's do this. Let's just draw some cards here. And so you can see over here on this Allied card, it says OC3, EC5. So that's the intelligence value of the card. So if playing this card as the Allied player, the Japanese would need to roll a 5 or less to basically to change the intelligence condition from surprise to intercept. If this card were being played as an OC card, not as an event card, they would only need to roll a 3 or less. So I can tell you that in looking at these numbers on the General Adachi card, it's a typical Japanese card. The Allies have a slightly easier task getting intercept on the Japanese cards. So a typical 3OC for the Japanese is an OC5 EC7, meaning that, and that's what this card is, it's got an EC value of 7. So that means that as the Allied player, the Allied player needs to roll a 7 or less. And actually, because the Japanese essentially moved in, there's a ZOI here. So if you move into or out of or through a ZOI of the reacting player gets a 2 die roll, a 2 modifier to the die roll for intelligence. So that means instead of needing a 7 or less, the Allies would need a 9 or less, which on a die that goes from 0 to 9 would be 100%, except that there is a special rule that says a natural 9 is always a miss on intelligence. So basically, in this case, the Allies are going to need a 9 or less, an 8 or less to convert this to intercept. So if we roll up here, we rolled a 2. A 2 is fine. It means the Allies convert to intercept, which means they can react. If it were surprise, then a couple of things would happen. First of all, the Japanese air would attack first, and if it killed the Allied air wouldn't have a chance to fire back. And then secondly, the Japanese air would get a +3 modifier in combat. But since it's not surprise, combat's going to be simultaneous. There won't be any modifier there. And so basically, what'll happen is also that obviously the Allies are going to have a chance to react here. So let's take a look and see what the Allies did in reaction. So to determine Allied reaction, the first thing we do is we have to look at the logistics value of the card, which, as I mentioned earlier, is a 3. You add that to the efficiency rating of the HQ. So we get 3 for the logistics plus 1 in red here for the efficiency rating. So SEAC can activate 4 units. It would like to activate these 4 units that I've got highlighted in blue here. One key thing to recognize about reaction is not an opportunity to move anywhere you want. Reaction is an opportunity to move so as you participate in a battle. So one of the requirements of being able to activate somebody in reaction is that they have to be able to participate in a battle hex somewhere. So, for example, this guy in Mandalay, we look at him and let's do this. So you can see there's a transport route that comes down here. So he can get to the battle hex because it's a half to there. And then normally it would be a half to here for the transport route, but because there's a battle going on, he's not able to use the transport route to get into that hex. He actually has to use the full movement point cost of the hex. So it's actually going to cost him a half for this hex plus 2 more is 2.5, but that's fine because it's a 3 OC value card, so he would be able to get in there. So he can reach. This guy doesn't even have to move to be able to reach. This guy only has to move to here to reach, and this guy, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 to get into Rangoon because you can't get in from this side here. And again, he has 3 legs of 5, so he's well within range. So we can see that, first of all these guys can reach. And secondly, it's not a problem for any of these guys from a supply perspective because although this guy here actually can't be reached by supply, from SEAC for supply, he can be supplied from Kunming here. And I won't go into the details of that. You can take a look at the other video on supply and activation to better understand the overland supply range. But anyway, these guys are all in supply. They can all reach the battle hex to participate, so they're all legal. So then the reaction movement will be this guy moving into the hex, this guy staying where he is, this guy moving into this hex here, and this guy moving into the hex here. So having reacted, now would be the time for the reaction player to play any attack reaction cards that he wants to play. That would typically be subs, for example. He doesn't have any, and so we just move right away to resolving the battles. And in a combat, and you can see we got a pretty big stack here, but so let me actually, just to make it a little bit easier, let me pull out some of these guys here. They're all in the battle hex. And these guys down here. So one of the things you'll notice is air units never move to the battle hex. Air units fight from range. So these air units staged to a hex that's within range of the combat. These reacting air units up here staged to within range of the combat, but the air units never actually move into the battle hex. Now this guy here, if I had chosen to activate him, he's a defending air unit, if I had chosen to activate him, he could have flown out of the battle hex if he wanted to fight at range. But because I didn't choose to activate him, he's not able to do that. We'll talk about the implications of that at another point when we get into hit allocation in more detail. But for now, let's just look at what we've got for combat strengths in the air-naval combat here. We do air-naval combat first, then we do ground combat. The air-naval combat sometimes can affect ground combat. In this case, it won't, but let's take a quick look. We've got, basically, we're going to have each of these guys, and so this guy's going to be, because they're at extreme range, so he's going to be 11. That's the 22 halved is 11, and the 20 halved is 10. So there's a total of 21 factors here for the Japanese. There are no modifiers for the Japanese in this particular combat. The Allies have got 14 and 5. Now remember, I said this guy did not activate, but defending units in the hex always fight, even if they are not activated. So the American Volunteer Group gets to throw in. It's actually reduced. That's what the light-colored bar here means. It was reduced previously. This, just to show you, this is its full-strength side. This is its reduced side. So there's 19 in the hex, and there is another 10 there for SEAC, which is 27. Sorry, I'm not counting right. 19 and 10 is 29, and 7 is 36. So we've got 36 total factors for the Allies, also with no modifiers. If this were 1943, if we were next turn, the Allies would get a +1 modifier for having an American air unit in the battle, but at this point they don't get that +1 yet. So it's 21 on the Japanese side and 36 on the Allied side in the air-naval combat. And I can tell you that in the actual battle, let's go to air-naval combat over here. In the actual battle, the Japanese rolled an 8 and the Allies rolled a 6. And if you look here, both of those are 1 result. That's a 1 times result. And what that means is that because the Japanese got a 1 times result, that's 1 times 21. So they do 21 points of damage against the Allies, and the Allies are going to do 36 points of damage against the Japanese. Because this is not a surprise attack, it's an intercept, the damage is simultaneous. So with 21, and another thing to keep in mind is that the attacker applies damage to the defender. That means the attacker gets to choose, or each player gets to choose his opponent's units that get hit, is the better way to say it. So the offensive player gets to choose which reaction units get hit, and the reaction player gets to choose which offensive units get hit. So the Japanese, with his 20, has a choice of, he could either flip the 2 air units, 10 and 9 is 19 out of the 21, or he could flip the Warspite, which would be 14. And in this case, the Japanese player chose to reduce both air units, and then turning it around with 36 points against the Japanese. If you look at this, so the defense values of air units, of most of the air units in the game, are 10, and most of the units have 2 steps. And so it'll take, basically, because we have to flip each unit first, it's going to take 10 points of damage to flip that guy, another 10 points of damage to flip that guy. We've got 16 points of damage left. We're going to take this guy, and we're going to, well, what I'll do is I'll show you where he goes. We can just put him in here. You can actually just, it's really simple. You can just go send to Deadpool, which is Control X, but just showing you where the Deadpool is there. So that's 30 out of 36 that we've applied to the Japanese. We have 6 left, but it takes 10 to do another step on this air division. We don't have 10, so basically the rest of that 6 gets wasted there. So that's the damage that we've done in the air-naval battle. Now, before we do anything else with the air-naval guys, we got to see what happens in the ground combat here. So in the ground combat, the Japanese actually have 56, and the Allies have got 28, plus the 6. Let's slide them in there so we don't forget them, plus the extra 6 here. So it's 28 plus 6 is 34. So it's basically 56 to 34 in the ground combat. And in the ground combat, if the Japanese, as the offensive player, were the only player to have air units left in the battle, the Japanese would get an extra +2 die roll modifier. If they were the only player to have naval units remaining in the battle, they could get another +2 modifier to the die. In this case, though, the Allies more than compensate. There's plenty of air units left, and the Japanese didn't have any naval units at all. So there's no modifiers for air or naval supremacy for the Japanese. There is, however, if we look at the chart here, you'll notice there's -1 for Defender and Jungle Hex. So the Japanese are going to be faced with a -1 die roll modifier in this combat. So what happened in the actual combat was that the Japanese rolled a 6 and the Allies rolled a 7. The Japanese 6 is reduced to a 5, so basically looking at the charts, the Japanese have a 5 and the Allies have a 7. The Japanese 5 on the ground combat results table, a 5 is a 1 times result, so that will be 1 times their 56, so 56 points against the Allies. The Allies have a 7, that's a 1.5 times result, and you'll recall they had 34, so 1.5 times 34 is 51 points of damage there. So if we go back and look at how we would apply those, and again, damage is going to be applied simultaneously here. And by the way, in surprise attacks, surprise only affects air-naval combat. It doesn't affect ground combat. So ground combat is always considered to be simultaneous, and there's no benefit to the attacker for having surprise in ground combat. So the Japanese, if you look at this, you can see everybody's defense strength is 12, and they're all 2-step units. So let me just slow that down so it'll be a little easier to see. So everybody's got a 12 defense strength, and they're all 2-step units. So with 56 points of damage coming from the Japanese, that's going to take 4 steps of 12 each is 48, and that's going to use up all the damage. The Japanese will have a little bit left over, but they can't quite get enough to get a 5th step. So they do 4 steps on the Allies. And the Allies with 51 points of damage are going to do a similar 4 steps on the Japanese. So before we actually go and reduce any units or eliminate any units, the key thing to note is that victory in the ground combat is determined by the player who takes the most step losses, or I should say maybe loss is determined by the player who takes the most step losses. But in the case of a tie, the defender wins the combat and retains control of the hex. So because both sides lost 4 steps here, and the Allies are defending, the Japanese are considered to have lost the ground combat. They'll have to retreat out of the hex. So this particular attempt to take Rangoon was not successful. Actually, in this game, at the beginning of the next turn, the Japanese were able to take Rangoon, but for now, the Allies have held. So let's look at how we're going to apply casualties. So the first thing we have to do, remember, we have to flip every unit before we can eliminate any unit. So applying casualties against the Japanese, remember we said 4 steps for 48. So we flip these 3 guys, and then we're going to pull this guy out, and we'll eliminate him by sending him to the dead pool. And the Japanese will have to retreat whence they came, which is back here. And now what the Japanese are going to do is they are going to first, again, have to do the same thing. They'll have to flip every unit in the hex first. That's 3 of the 4 steps they get. And now if you look at this, the little yellow circle in the upper right-hand corner of the 1st Indian Corps indicates that that's not a replaceable corps. That corps, once it's gone, can never come back. And so the Japanese strategically are going to want to eliminate that. And I'm not going to send that to the dead pool. I'm actually going to go delete because he can't come back, so I don't want him in my dead pool. So at this point, the Japanese have retreated. The Allies are in possession of the hex. And then the last thing that we're going to do here is post-battle movement. And in post-battle movement, the air and naval units get to move exactly as far as they moved either in the offensive or in reaction. At this point, we'll just keep the 2nd Air Division right here in Bangkok so it can keep its air coverage over these guys. And we'll have Worst Bite return out there, and we'll have the SEAC air unit under here, return over there. That's the post-battle movement, and at this point, that offensive is now concluded. Since we're coming up on 30 minutes here, let's end this, and I'll provide a couple of additional examples of running an offensive in a part 2 video.